I still think about this every winter, especially when the roads get quiet and the snow starts falling heavy enough to blur the edges of everything. This happened back in 2016, when I was driving across the state to visit my cousin Mark and his partner Elise. We hadn't seen each other in years, and they'd moved way out to the northern edge of the map, the kind of place people only end up in if they're trying to disappear or just don't care about being found. The drive was brutal, nearly 17 hours total, and that's if the weather behaved, which it didn't. I split the trip into 2 days, about 8 or 9 hours the first day, crashed somewhere cheap, then finished the rest in the morning. On the way up, I stayed in a roadside motel near a place called Pine Hollow, which was little more than a gas station and a diner with flickering lights. On the way back, though, I decided to try something different. I booked a small rental house in a town called Grayson Fork, mostly because it was the only option that didn't involve sleeping in my car. Snow slowed me down more than I expected. Thick, heavy flakes that stuck to the windshield and made the road feel narrower than it really was. By the time I rolled into Grayson Fork, it was already dark, around 9 at night. The town itself barely felt real. One main road, a handful of stores closed for the night, and long stretches of darkness between them. Most of the houses were set far back from the road, hidden behind fields or tree lines, like they didn't want to be seen. The rental house was even farther out. The GPS kept telling me to turn onto smaller and smaller roads until I was convinced it had lost its mind. When I finally found the place, it felt dropped into the middle of nowhere. No nearby houses, no porch lights in the distance, just open land and the sound of wind dragging across frozen ground. The house itself looked wrong in a way I couldn't explain at first. It had that log cabin shape, but the siding was newer, cleaner, almost too clean. Big windows, sharp angles. It felt like someone had picked it up from a catalog and set it down where it didn't belong. I parked on the gravel driveway and sat in the car for a minute, engine still running, just listening. Nothing. No animals, no traffic, just the ticking of the cooling engine. Eventually, I grabbed my bag and went inside. The lock worked fine. The inside looked exactly like the listing photos. Open living room, small kitchen, hallway leading to a bedroom and bathroom. Everything neat, almost staged. I did a quick walkthrough, mostly out of habit, then dropped my stuff in the bedroom and flopped onto the couch. That's when I heard the tapping. It was soft at first, a light, deliberate tap against glass, right behind me. I turned around so fast my neck hurt. A woman stood outside the living room window, her face inches from the glass. Her hair hung down around her shoulders in uneven clumps like she hadn't brushed it in days, maybe weeks. Her eyes were wide, and not in a scared way, more like she was trying too hard to look alert, like she was watching for something. She raised her hand and tapped again. Then she pointed toward the front door and walked out a few. I sat there frozen for a second, heart pounding. I kept telling myself she was probably just a local, maybe lost, maybe confused. Still, something about the way she moved bothered me. No hesitation, no urgency, just calm, slow steps. I opened the front door a crack, keeping my foot braced against it. She smiled immediately. "I need a little help," she said, cheerful, like she was asking for directions. "With what?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder, toward the road. "I can't really see anything," I said. "I don't think I can help." Her smile faded, completely, like someone had flipped a switch. "I dropped something in the road," she said again. Same words, same tone, even the same pause between sentences. "I understand," I said, trying to stay polite. "I just can't help you with that." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she repeated it again, word for word, same flat delivery. I closed the door. I locked it, stood there listening, and didn't move until I heard footsteps crunching away on gravel. I told myself she was just strange, maybe drunk, maybe not all there. Still, the house felt different after that. Smaller, too quiet. I watched TV for a while, volume turned up higher than usual. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I went to bed. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept replaying her voice in my head, the exact way she said the same sentence. No emotion, no variation. When I finally drifted off, it felt shallow, like I was barely under. Something woke me up. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. Then I heard it again, a soft sound near the front of the house. Not tapping this time, more like pressure, a faint scrape. I got out of bed and moved down the hallway, every muscle tight. The sound was coming from the front door. Just as I reached it, the handle turned. The door pushed inward. I slammed my shoulder against it, throwing my weight forward. Whoever was on the other side pushed back, hard, stronger than I expected. For a few seconds, it was just pressure and breath and the faint sound of effort on the other side. Then it stopped. Footsteps ran down the driveway, fast. I locked the door and ran to the window, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the porch light. I didn't stay. I grabbed my bag, ran outside, and got into my car. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the front of the house. For a split second, I thought I saw someone standing near the window. Not the woman, someone taller, watching. I drove until the sun came up. I never reported it. I never went back. I told Mark and Elise I'd just been tired and wanted to get home faster. Sometimes, though, I think about that woman, about the way she repeated herself, about how whoever pushed on that door knew exactly when to stop. And what really gets to me is this. Every once in a while, when I'm half asleep, I hear that same calm voice in my head, saying the same sentence over and over, not asking for help, just reminding me where something was left, out in the road.
Back in 2009, when I was 19, I lived alone in a small rental house on the edge of a quiet town called Briar Hollow. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. One grocery store, one blinking traffic light. Everyone waved, even if they didn't know you. That's why what happened still sticks with me. I had an old desktop computer sitting in my bedroom closet. It was bulky, loud, and slow. The kind that took 5 full minutes just to start up. I didn't need it anymore, and no store would have taken it, but it still turned on. I figured someone could use it for parts or basic stuff. At the time, I was broke and between jobs, so even a little cash sounded good. I mentioned it to Evan, a guy I vaguely knew through my older sister. Not a friend, exactly. More like someone who had been around at family barbecues a few times. He told me his cousin, Lucas, might want it. Lucas supposedly fixed electronics and flipped them. Evan said he'd pass along my email. I didn't think much of it. It felt safer than dealing with a total stranger. Small town logic. Everyone knows someone who knows someone. The next afternoon, I got an email from Lucas. Short message, polite, but dry. He said he could come by the next morning, test the computer, and pay cash if it worked. He asked for my address, which I hesitated on for maybe half a second before sending. Again, small town, shared connections, nothing to worry about. We agreed on 10:30 a.m. He said he'd let me know when he was on the way. The next morning, I woke up early and cleaned the house more than I needed to. I wiped counters that were already clean. I moved the computer from the bedroom to the living room, closer to the front door. I kept checking my email. Nothing. By 10:30, still nothing. By 10:45, I started feeling annoyed. I hate waiting. I sent a quick message asking if he was still coming. No reply. Around 11:15, I opened the curtains and sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV while actually watching the street. Briar Hollow had long, empty roads. You noticed when a car slowed down. At 11:40, one did. A dark sedan crept past my house, slowed almost to a stop, then rolled forward and parked directly across from my driveway. The engine stayed running. I muted the TV and waited. No one got out. I told myself maybe they were checking directions, or on the phone. But minutes passed. The car didn't move. The driver didn't wave, didn't look at the house, just sat there. Then, without any rush, the car pulled away and disappeared down the road. I stood up and walked to the window, suddenly uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't see the car again. No email ever came from Lucas. Not that day, not after. Eventually, I shrugged it off. People flake. Evan later said he hadn't heard from his cousin either. We laughed it off, and I stopped thinking about it. At least, I thought I did. That night, I went to bed early. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the refrigerator click on and off. I fell asleep fast but woke up a little after 11 p.m., wide awake for no reason. That's when I heard it. A dull sound. Not loud, just wrong, like something heavy being pressed against the house. I held my breath and listened. A few seconds later, it happened again. A soft thud, followed by a faint scraping noise. It was coming from downstairs. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noise. That's normal. Still, I got out of bed. The floor felt colder than usual under my feet. I didn't turn on any lights. As I stepped into the hallway, the sound came again. Louder this time, more deliberate. I froze halfway down the stairs, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. The noise came from the back of the house, near the small laundry room and the narrow hallway that led to the yard. I moved slowly, holding the railing so tight my fingers hurt. Then I heard glass creak, not breaking, just bending. I rounded the corner and looked down the hallway. At first, I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted. Someone was standing outside the back window. They were close, too close. Their shape filled the glass, shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly, like they were listening. Another hard shove rattled the window frame. Dust fell from the top of it. I stumbled backward, and that's when the figure moved. They leaned forward until their face pressed against the glass. I couldn't make out every detail, but I saw the outline of a nose, a mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile, and eyes that locked onto mine the second they saw me. We stared at each other. No screaming, no movement, just that awful stillness. Then, slowly, the figure lifted a hand and tapped the glass once, softly, like a reminder. I don't remember running to the phone, but I remember talking to the police. They came quickly, searched the yard, checked the windows. Nothing, no footprints, no broken glass, just small dents around the window latch, like someone had been testing it over and over. They asked if I knew anyone who might do this. I mentioned Lucas, the computer, the car earlier that day. They wrote it down, said they'd follow up. They never did. A few days later, Evan called me. He sounded confused. He said his cousin Lucas had moved out of state years ago. No one had his email. No one had heard from him. I asked him who had given me the name. There was a long pause before he said, "I thought you knew. I still live with the feeling that someone stood outside my house that night, not trying to get in yet, just checking, just making sure I was really there. Sometimes, when I wake up suddenly in the dark, I swear I can still hear that soft tapping sound, not on the window, on the inside." I was 27 when all of this happened. It was the year 2019, and for the first time in my life, I was completely on my own. No roommates, no shared walls, no one borrowing my food or leaving lights on. Just me. For most of my 20s, I'd lived in cramped apartments with friends, co-workers, even a cousin for a while. I liked them well enough, but I always felt like I was borrowing space instead of owning it. I needed quiet. I needed a door I could close and know nobody was on the other side unless I invited them. So when I finally scraped together enough money to buy a small house, it felt unreal. Not a dream house or anything fancy, just a place that was mine. The house was in a tiny town called Greywillow. I'd never heard of it before I started looking at listings. It was about 2 hours from the city where I used to live, far enough that nobody would drop by unannounced, close enough that I could still drive back if I needed something. Greywillow wasn't the kind of town you see in postcards. No big main street, no coffee shops with chalkboard signs. It was quiet in a way that felt almost paused, like the town was holding its breath. Houses weren't packed together. Most of them sat alone, with wide gaps of land between them. Fields, clumps of trees, old fences that didn't seem to fence anything in particular. My house was on the edge of all that, past the last stretch of paved road, down a long dirt driveway that cut through dense forest. Tall trees on both sides, their branches leaning toward each other overhead. During the day, it looked peaceful. At night, it felt like driving into a tunnel. On moving day, I didn't know anyone in Greywillow. Not a single person. No neighbors waving hello. No one slowing down to watch the moving van. It was just me and the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. I rented a van for the day and started unloading as soon as I parked. I didn't bother organizing. I just carried box after box into the living room and stacked them wherever there was space. Sweat, dust, cardboard, that dry smell of old wood inside a house that hasn't been lived in for a while. Hours passed without me seeing another human being. The forest didn't make much noise either. No birds, no insects, just wind moving through leaves in slow waves. By the time the sun started to dip behind the trees, everything felt heavier. The air got cooler, and the shadows stretched out longer than they should have. I was tired and sore, and just wanted to finish. I picked up the last couple of boxes from the van and turned toward the porch. That's when I realized someone was standing there. I hadn't heard footsteps, I hadn't heard a car. He was just suddenly there, right in front of my door, close enough that I would have bumped into him if I'd taken another step. I actually gasped, like a full, embarrassing sound. The man flinched too, like he hadn't meant to scare me. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, tall, thin, wearing a faded jacket that didn't quite fit him right. His smile came slow, stretching across his face like it had to remember how. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." He introduced himself as Arthur. Said he lived nearby. That was the word he used. Not next door, not down the road, just nearby. I told him my name and said I'd just moved in. I tried to sound friendly, but my eyes kept drifting past him, down the driveway, trying to figure out where he'd come from. There was no sound of gravel, no open gate, just forest. Thick, dark, endless forest. Arthur followed my gaze and chuckled softly. "Hard to see folks coming around here," he said. "Trees swallow sound." That didn't make me feel better. He stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, just looking at me, like he was waiting for something else to happen. Then he nodded once, stepped off the porch, and walked away. Not down the driveway, straight into the trees. I stood there holding a box against my chest until my arms started to ache. I didn't hear branches snapping or leaves crunching. He just faded between the trunks and was gone. I rushed the rest of my stuff inside and locked the door. I checked every window, pressing my face close to the glass. Nothing, just darkness and my own reflection staring back. When I drove the van back to town, I watched the road carefully. If Arthur lived nearby, I should have seen him walking. I didn't. The road stayed empty the whole way. I told myself I was just tired. That night, after getting back from returning the van, I started unpacking slowly. I built my bed in the bedroom, hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. Every creak of the house made me pause. Every pop of settling wood felt too loud. Then came the knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm enough to say someone was confident I'd answer. I froze. The knock came again. Same rhythm. I walked to the door as quietly as I could and looked through the peephole. Arthur stood there, but he wasn't smiling. His shoulders twitched, like he couldn't quite stay still. His head tilted at an odd angle, then corrected itself. His eyes weren't scanning or blinking. They were locked on the doorknob. "Hey," he said, voice louder than before. "It's me. From earlier. Thought I'd check in." I didn't respond. His breathing sounded wrong, too shallow, too fast. "Go on," he said. "Open it." The knock came harder this time, not pounding, just impatient. I stayed silent. His face changed. The friendly mask slipped. His mouth tightened. His jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing something invisible. Then he turned around. He faced the forest. He raised his hand and waved. Not a greeting, not a signal to come closer, more like counting. Slow motions, deliberate. After that he ran, not down the driveway, into the trees. I called the police with shaking hands. They came, searched, asked questions. They didn't find anyone. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. In the weeks after, I met people from town, real neighbors. A woman named Denise, who lived a mile down the road. An older couple named Mark and Ellen, who waved every time they passed. None of them knew an Arthur. They didn't recognize my description. Some of them exchanged looks when I mentioned the forest. Eventually, life settled into something close to normal, or at least a version of normal I could accept. But sometimes, late at night, I hear movement outside. Soft, careful, like someone who knows where not to step. And sometimes, when I lock the door before bed, I notice faint smudges on the handle. like fingerprints that don't quite look human. I don't open the door anymore, not for anyone, because every now and then, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I swear I hear someone breathing on the other side of it. Back in 2014, when I was 19, I lived in a tiny place called Hollow Creek. It wasn't really a town so much as a cluster of houses pretending to be one. Fewer than 1,000 people lived there, and most of us had known each other forever. If someone new showed up, everybody knew by the end of the day. That's important later. Behind Hollow Creek was a massive stretch of woods everyone just called the back timber. No signs, no real trails, just flat land that went on for miles, broken up by muddy ponds and slow rivers that smelled like wet leaves and iron. I'd grown up wandering those woods with my older cousin Evan, back when we still talked. By the time this happened, we hadn't spoken in almost a year. No big dramatic reason, just one of those quiet falling outs that never gets fixed. That afternoon, I decided to hike out to Ashwater Bend, a wide curve in the river where the trees opened up just enough to see the sky. I'd been there a few times, but I'd never stayed overnight. I told myself I wanted to camp. Really, I just wanted space. Hollow Creek felt too small lately, like the walls were inching closer every day. I packed light and headed north, straight into the trees. No path, no markers, just memory and instinct. The woods were quiet in that way that feels normal at first. Birds chirping, leaves shifting. Every sound had a clear reason. About 2 hours in, when the sun was already starting to dip, I noticed how empty it felt. Not peaceful, empty, like something had pressed pause on the forest. That's when I almost walked straight into Caleb. We both froze. We were maybe 6 feet apart, with thin tree trunks between us like flimsy barriers. Caleb was my cousin Evan's old friend. I hadn't seen him in years. Last I heard, he'd moved away after some trouble no one liked to talk about. He stared at me like I wasn't supposed to be there. I laughed awkwardly and said his name, but the sound came out wrong, too loud. He didn't answer. His mouth twitched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then, without saying a word, he stepped sideways and disappeared between the trees. I stood there longer than I should have. Something about the way he moved felt rushed, like he'd been caught doing something private. I told myself it was nothing. People wander the woods. That's normal. Still, when I looked back a minute later, I saw him moving fast. Not walking, not running either. More like gliding, trying not to make noise. I kept going. Ashwater Bend looked the same as always. The river slid past slowly, dark and thick. I set up my tent on a patch of dry ground and started a fire. The sky faded from blue to purple, then to black. Stars came out sharp and bright. I remember thinking how calm everything felt again, like the woods had forgiven me. Sometime after midnight, the fire crackled low. That's when I heard footsteps. Not heavy ones, careful ones. They stopped when I shifted in my seat. I didn't see anything beyond the edge of the firelight, but I knew someone was there. You know that feeling, right? When your skin tightens and your body reacts before your brain catches up. I called out, trying to sound casual. No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it through the trees. Nothing. But when I lowered it, I heard breathing, slow, controlled, like whoever it was had practiced being quiet. I walked a few steps toward the sound. My hands were shaking, and I hated that. The beam slid over bark and branches until it landed on a shape that didn't belong. Caleb. He stood perfectly still, about 20 feet away. His face looked different in the harsh light, thinner, older. His eyes reflected back like an animal's. I acted like I didn't see him. I don't know why. Maybe because pretending felt safer than acknowledging him. I turned around, packed what I could carry, and left everything else. Tent, food, fire. I walked along the river until my legs burned, then ran until my lungs hurt. I didn't stop until dawn. I never went back for my stuff. A week later, I finally asked Evan about Caleb. He looked confused, then uncomfortable. Caleb hadn't been around in years. He leaned in and lowered his voice, like the woods might hear him. Caleb died near Ashwater Bend, drowned. They never found all of him. I still don't hike anymore. Sometimes though, late at night, I swear I can hear careful footsteps outside my window. And sometimes, when I look at old photos of Hollow Creek, there's someone in the background I don't remember inviting. He's always standing just behind the trees. I still remember that summer because everything in my life felt half-built, like I'd unpacked the boxes but hadn't figured out where anything belonged yet. It was 2018, and I'd just moved out of a shared student house and into a small apartment on the edge of Brookline Ridge. The place wasn't fancy. Beige walls, old carpet, the kind of apartment where every sound echoes a little too much. But it was mine, and that felt important at the time. I didn't own much. Most of the furniture I'd been using before belonged to my roommate, Jenna, and when she moved out, she took all of it with her. I slept on a mattress on the floor for the first few weeks, telling myself it was temporary. I had a little savings, but I was trying to be responsible. Rent, utilities, groceries set, all added up faster than I expected. Still, there were a few things I couldn't put off anymore. A bed frame was at the top of the list. I spent a few nights scrolling through used listings on my phone, lying on the mattress, the ceiling light buzzing faintly above me. Most of what I saw was either broken, stained, or wildly overpriced. Eventually, I ended up on a local classified site called TownTrade. That's where I saw it. The listing was simple. No long description, just a few photos of a plain wooden bed frame, medium brown, nothing fancy. It looked solid, clean, normal. The price was low enough to make me pause and reread it twice. I messaged the seller without thinking too hard about it. His name was Ronan. He replied almost immediately, which I remember noticing because it felt unusually fast. He said the frame was still available and asked if I could come by that evening. I said yes before my cautious side had time to catch up. We agreed on a time, and he sent me the address later that afternoon. While I waited, I cleared space in my bedroom, sliding boxes into the corner and leaning them against the wall. The apartment felt quieter than usual, like it was listening. I kept checking my phone, half expecting the seller to cancel or change his mind. At 5:40, Ronan sent the address. It was about 20 minutes away, out past the newer neighborhoods, near a place called Elkwood Hollow. I hadn't been out that way before. Honestly, I hadn't explored much since moving. Everything still felt unfamiliar. I grabbed cash, locked my door, and headed out. The drive started off normal enough. Stores, traffic lights, people walking dogs. Then, little by little, it thinned out. The sidewalks disappeared. Streetlights became less frequent. Trees pressed closer to the road, their branches hanging low, brushing against each other overhead. By the time I turned onto Ronan's street, my phone signal had dropped to 1 bar. The houses there were old and unevenly spaced, like they'd been built without much of a plan. Some had lights on, others were completely dark. The address led me to a narrow driveway with cracked concrete and weeds pushing through the edges. The house itself was 2 stories, painted a dull gray that looked darker in the fading light. One of the upstairs windows glowed softly. The front door was open just enough to let a thin line of yellow light spill onto the porch. I sat in my car for a moment longer than I meant to, keys still in my hand. Then I told myself I was being dramatic and got out. Ronan answered the door before I even knocked. He was taller than I expected, broad-shouldered, with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He talked easily, like he'd been practicing the conversation ahead of time. He called me friend right away. Not my name, just friend. "Come on in," he said. Frames upstairs. The inside of the house smelled faintly sweet, like old fabric and something metallic underneath. The floors creaked loudly with every step. As we climbed the stairs, he talked non-stop about the neighborhood, about how quiet it was, about how people didn't appreciate solid furniture anymore. The spare bedroom was at the end of a narrow hallway. The moment I stepped inside, my stomach tightened. The room wasn't empty. There was a dresser with drawers half open, clothes folded inside, shoes lined neatly against the wall. A lamp on the nightstand was still warm, like it had been turned off recently, and the bed frame, the one I came for, had a mattress on it, sheets, pillows, a blanket pulled back like someone had just gotten up. I hesitated. "I only wanted the frame," I said, "not the mattress or anything else." Ronan nodded quickly. Of course, mattress stays." I walked closer to the bed, running my hand along the wooden edge. It felt solid enough, but something about the room felt wrong, too personal, like I was standing somewhere I wasn't meant to be. Ronan watched me the whole time. "I can help you carry it," he said. "But first, let's have a drink. Long day, yeah?" He disappeared into the hallway and came back almost instantly with 2 glasses, not bottles, glasses already poured. I shook my head. "No thanks. I should really get going." His smile faltered, just for a second. "Oh, come on," he said. "Don't be rude. You're already here." The air in the room felt thicker, warmer. I took a step back, closer to the door. "I'll pass," I said. "I'll just head out." That's when his voice changed. Not loud, not angry, just flatter, empty. "Don't you want to be polite?" I stepped into the hallway, my heart starting to race. I didn't like how narrow it felt now, how close the walls seemed. Behind me, Ronan laughed softly. "Wait," he said. "You can take it for free. No charge, I insist." I didn't answer. I moved faster, my footsteps loud on the stairs. I could hear his behind me now, not rushing, just following. When I reached the front door, I didn't bother to look back. I ran to my car, hands shaking as I unlocked it. As I pulled away, I glanced in the mirror. Ronan stood in the doorway, still smiling, holding one of the glasses. He raised it slightly, like a toast. I didn't sleep much that night. At some point, I checked the listing again. It was gone. No photos, no name, nothing. A few days later, while unpacking, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. On my phone, in the sent messages, the conversation with Ronan was still there, but his replies were blank. No text, just timestamps. Sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is quiet, I think about that bedroom, about the warm lamp, the turned-down sheets, and I wonder who was supposed to come back to that bed, or if someone already did. My name's Evan, and back in 2016, I was working nights at a gas station called Northway Fuel, right on the edge of a small town called Ridgefall. It wasn't the kind of place people stopped at, unless they had to. One road in, one road out, trees pressing close on both sides, like they were trying to listen in. I got that job through my older cousin, Mark. He didn't work nights himself. He said he was too old for that nonsense, which really meant he didn't like being alone after dark. He covered day shifts and let me handle the overnights. I was 19 and needed the money, so I didn't argue. Most nights were dull in the worst way. Long stretches of nothing, broken up by someone buying cigarettes or coffee that tasted burnt, no matter how fresh it was supposed to be. The lights inside the store buzzed faintly, like insects trapped in glass. If you stood still long enough, you could hear the refrigerators humming and the rain tapping on the roof like someone drumming their fingers. That night started off normal. Rain came down steady and heavy, turning the parking lot into a sheet of black glass. The clock above the counter clicked over to midnight, then kept going. I scrolled through my phone, cleaned the counter, and paced around just to stay awake. By around 1 in the morning, it was completely dead. No cars, no headlights on the road, nothing. The rain made everything feel sealed off from the rest of the world, like the station was floating on its own little island of light. I decided to tidy the shelves. Nothing serious, just lining things up so they looked neat. While I was crouched down, I noticed a sudden wash of light slide across the floor. Headlights. I didn't turn right away. People stopped for gas all the time, but the light stayed there longer than it should have. I stood up and glanced out the window. There was a dark sedan parked at one of the pumps. The engine was off. A man stood beside the driver's door, not pumping gas, not moving, just standing there. The moment our eyes met, he shifted, not in a casual way, more like he'd been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. He stepped back, half hidden behind the door, but I could still see him watching me through the glass. I told myself not to be weird about it. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he was deciding if he wanted to come inside. But minutes passed. 5, then 10. He never touched the pump. I went back behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts while keeping him in the corner of my eye. Every time I looked up, he was still there, still watching, not waving, not coming in, just staring like the store was a screen and I was something playing on it. Eventually, he got into his car. The headlights flicked on and off a few times, like he was struggling to start it. When it finally turned over, he peeled out of the lot fast, tires hissing on the wet pavement. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Something bothered me enough that I checked the pump records. The one he'd parked at hadn't been used since early evening. No charge, no transaction. He hadn't bought a single drop of gas. I remember laughing a little to myself, trying to shake it off. "Get a grip," I said out loud, just to hear a human voice. The next couple of hours crawled by. A truck passed on the road. Someone bought a soda and left. Then everything went quiet again. At about 3 in the morning, I heard something that didn't belong. At first, it blended with the rain. A soft dragging sound, slow and uneven. I thought it was water running down the side of the building. Then it stopped. Then it started again, closer this time. Footsteps. They moved along the wall outside, careful and slow. like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I leaned forward, trying to see out the side window, but the angle was wrong. The parking lot was empty. I left the counter and walked toward the back hallway. Every step felt louder than it should have. The back door was solid metal, painted a dull grey, with scratches near the bottom from years of use. I pressed my ear against it. The footsteps were right there. I held my breath. I could hear someone breathing on the other side. Slow, controlled, to calm. The door handle turned slightly, just enough to make the lock click. Then nothing. I stood there frozen, my hand hovering near the wall like I might need to catch myself. After what felt like forever, I heard a low sound. Not quite a word. More like a frustrated growl. Something scraped against the door. Long, deliberate. The sound made my teeth hurt. Then the footsteps moved away. I didn't chase the sound. I didn't look outside. I ran back to the counter and locked myself in the office, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone while calling the police. They arrived fast, lights flashing red and blue across the wet pavement. They searched the area but didn't find anyone on foot. What they did find was a sedan parked down the road, barely visible through the trees. It was out of gas. The plates didn't match the car. The officer told me it had been reported missing from another state weeks earlier. He said it like it was no big deal, like stolen cars just wandered into towns on their own. Before they left, one of them pointed out the mark on the back door. A long, thin groove cut into the metal. Clean, intentional. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. A few days later, Mark told me they never caught the guy. No fingerprints, no follow-up, just a report filed and forgotten. I quit soon after, moved away, tried to forget. But sometimes, when it's raining hard and I'm up late, I think about that night, about how calm the breathing sounded on the other side of the door, about how the man never rushed, never panicked, and I wonder if he really ran out of gas, or if he left it there on purpose, close enough to walk back. Let me tell it the way I usually tell friends, sitting around late, when everyone's a little tired and the lights feel too bright. This happened in 2016, back when I was doing contract work for a small tech accounting firm called Northline Solutions. I wasn't a full employee. I was filling in for my cousin Mara, who had just had a baby and needed someone she trusted to cover her workload for a few months. That's how I ended up there. Not because I loved the job, not because I planned to stay, just because family asked. The office sat at the edge of an industrial park outside Briar Hollow, one of those towns that looks friendly during the day and empty at night. The building itself was a squat two-story rectangle with tinted windows and thin walls. During business hours, it felt boring and normal. After dark, it felt like a place people forgot existed. I had already missed a couple days that week after catching the flu, and I was behind, really behind. So on a Tuesday night in early November, I decided to stay late and catch up. I told myself I'd work a few hours that night and a few more the next evening. Simple plan. By 10 o'clock, everyone else had gone home. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes a few people stayed late, but that night it was just me. I remember noticing how quiet it got once the last elevator ride ended. No keyboards, no footsteps, just the soft hum of the building itself. My desk sat in the middle of a wide-open room filled with rows of empty desks. During the day it felt busy and cramped. At night it felt like sitting on a stage, with too much space and nowhere to hide. I kept typing, forcing myself to focus. Around 11, my eyes started burning. My head kept dipping forward. I finally gave up and went to the break room to make coffee. The lights flickered when I turned them on. I remember thinking I should have taken that as a sign and just gone home. While the coffee brewed, I leaned against the counter, eyes closed, listening to the slow drip into the mug. That's when the sound hit. A single, deep bang, not a crash, not a clatter. One solid, like something heavy slamming into metal. The sound rolled through the building and seemed to settle in my chest. I snapped awake and stood there, frozen, listening for anything else. Footsteps, voices, another sound. Nothing came. Just silence again. I walked to the break room door and looked out toward the stairwell. The lights were dimmer out there. The stairs curved down into shadow. I stood there longer than I want to admit, waiting for something to move, but nothing did. I told myself it was probably nothing. A pipe, a door, somewhere downstairs. Old buildings make noises. Everyone knows that. I grabbed my coffee and went back to my desk, though I kept glancing over my shoulder while I worked. An hour passed, maybe more. The coffee barely helped. My fingers slowed. The screen blurred. At some point, I must have nodded off. When I woke up, my neck hurt and my mouth felt dry. I was annoyed at myself for falling asleep, but that faded fast when I realized something was wrong. There was a sound, a quiet, steady beeping. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent. It was slow and calm, repeating every few seconds, like it had all the time in the world. I sat still and listened, trying to place it. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. I checked the time on my laptop. 1:58 a.m. That's when I decided I was done for the night. I packed up my bag and stood, telling myself I'd just check the sound on my way out. I didn't like leaving without knowing what it was. As I stepped into the stairwell, the beeping grew clearer, and that's when I felt it, that tight, uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. The kind you get when your body notices something before your brain does. Halfway down the stairs, I could see the main hallway. The lights were on, but they looked harsh and wrong, like they didn't belong there at that hour. At the far end of the hall, the front door was open. Something long and dark lay on the floor in front of it. I stopped moving. It took a second for my brain to catch up. The door was never open at night, ever, and that thing on the floor, it looked like a crowbar. That's when the beeping finally clicked. The security system. It wasn't an alarm screaming for help. It was a quiet warning, like a reminder. I didn't think. I didn't investigate. I turned around and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, fumbling for my keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. I locked myself in my car and called the police. They arrived fast. Faster than I expected. They searched the building and found nothing. No one. No damage inside, aside from the broken front door. That should have been the end of it. But then the officer asked if there were cameras. We sat in a small office watching grainy footage from earlier that night. At 11:04 p.m., a man walked up to the front entrance. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look around. He swung a metal tool once, hard, and the door gave way. The bang I heard in the break room suddenly made sense. The footage showed him moving slowly through the first floor, pausing often, like he was listening. Then he went upstairs. That's when my hands started shaking again. The camera angle showed my office, rows of desks, my chair, me, sitting there typing, and behind me, just a few feet away, stood the man. He didn't rush, he didn't hide, he just stood there, watching. For a long time. Later footage showed him leaving, then coming back upstairs while I slept. He walked around the room, touched my desk, opened drawers. At one point, he leaned close enough that his shadow covered my hands. There were no cameras everywhere, so we don't know how long he stayed, or what he was looking for, or why he didn't take anything. The officer told me I was lucky, said things could have been much worse. I nodded. I agreed. I went home and didn't sleep. Mara came back to work a month later. I didn't tell her everything. I just said I couldn't cover nights anymore. I've tried to forget about it. Most days, I almost succeed. But sometimes, when I wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, I hear that same slow beeping in my head. And I remember something the officer said offhandedly as we were leaving. The system had logged activity after I ran out. Not movement, just a door closing. I've never really told anyone this whole story straight through, but it still sticks with me. Not in a dramatic way. More like something that never fully leaves your thoughts, no matter how much time passes. This happened in late autumn of 2021. My name's Evan, and back then I was living alone in a narrow two-story house on the edge of a small town called Richford. It was one of those places where everything gets quiet after dark, like the town collectively decides to stop breathing. I was working remotely at the time, mostly editing reports for a small consulting firm. Nothing exciting, just something that paid the bills. That night was a Friday. I remember that clearly because I kept telling myself I just had to finish one last report and then the weekend would finally be mine. No alarms, no emails, just sleep. By the time this started, it had to be close to 10:30 p.m. I'd been sitting in my upstairs office for hours, staring at the same paragraph, rereading the same sentence without understanding a word of it. My eyes burned, my shoulders ached. I kept rubbing my face, hoping it would wake me up somehow. Eventually, I stood up and stretched. Nothing fancy, just rolling my shoulders, pacing a bit, trying to shake off that heavy, foggy feeling you get when you've been sitting too long. As I walked past the window across from my desk, something shifted outside. Not fast, not obvious, just movement. I stopped mid-step and leaned closer to the glass. The window looked out over the front of the house. You could see the driveway, part of the garage roof, and the short walkway leading to the porch. At first, I didn't see anything. I actually laughed to myself and shook my head. Too tired, I thought, seeing things. Then it happened again. A shadow slid across the concrete path. Slow, careful, like it didn't want to be noticed. My stomach tightened. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the dark space where the porch light should have revealed something. The shadow barely moved, but it was there. It had shape, height, weight. Someone was standing at my front door. I don't know why I didn't just turn on a light or call someone. Instead, I went downstairs as quietly as possible. Every step felt louder than it should have. The house creaked in places it never usually did. I leaned toward the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing inches from the door. He looked older than me, maybe mid-40s. His head was shaved, and his beard was uneven, like he'd trimmed it without a mirror. His eyes were open wide, but unfocused, as if he wasn't really looking at the door at all. He didn't knock. He didn't move. I watched him for what felt like forever. My first thought was that maybe he had the wrong house. My second thought was worse. I couldn't tell how long he'd already been standing there. I made a decision I regret even now. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. He didn't react, not even a blink. "What do you need?" I asked. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. He stared at me, then slowly shifted his gaze over my shoulder, past me, into the house. His eyes tracked down the hallway like he was counting rooms. I stepped forward and blocked his view. "You can't be here," I said. "You need to leave." Still nothing. I closed the door, harder than I meant to. A second later, I heard footsteps moving away from the porch. I waited until they faded completely, then locked the door and leaned my forehead against it, breathing out slowly. I told myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. Less than 10 minutes later, the knock came. Not a knock, really. More like a punch. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and angry. I yanked the door open again, adrenaline overriding common sense. He was closer this time. Too close. Something had changed. His eyes were sharper now, focused, and his right hand was tucked behind his leg. I saw the edge of something dark and metallic catch the porch light. Before I could say anything, he lunged forward. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as the handle twisted violently from the other side. The door shook. He hit it again and again, then suddenly stopped. Footsteps ran down the porch. I didn't move for a long time after that. I called the police, but they never found anyone. No neighbors saw anything. No cameras picked him up. Life moved on, at least on the surface. A couple years later, I decided to get away for a bit, clear my head. I drove west and ended up camping alone near a wooded area locals called Pine Hollow, tucked away outside a town named Marrow Creek. I'd been there once before with my cousin Liam, years ago. This time, I went alone. The woods felt different at night, not dangerous, just watchful. Before sunset, I went for a short walk to stretch my legs. That's when I saw him. A man, maybe 60 yards away, weaving between the trees. He was moving his hands as he walked, nodding like he was in the middle of a conversation. His mouth kept opening and closing, but I couldn't hear anything. No phone, no one with him. He disappeared into the trees, and every instinct I had told me to go back. So I did. Hours later, long after dark, I heard a voice, soft, muffled, talking to itself somewhere beyond the firelight. No flashlight, no footsteps, just a voice drifting closer, then farther away. I covered the fire and sat still. Then the footsteps came, fast, direct. He stepped into the firelight and stopped across from me. Same shaved head, same uneven beard, that same almost friendly smile. I raised my pistol and told him to leave. He looked at the gun, then at me. Then he smiled wider. And this is the part I don't like to think about. He leaned forward slightly and whispered, "You left the light on this time." Then he turned and walked into the trees. I packed up and left before sunrise. I never went back. Sometimes, late at night, I still catch movement outside my window, just for a second, just long enough to make me wonder if he ever really left, or if he's just waiting for me to open the door again. I'll tell this like I usually do when it comes up late at night, when someone asks why I don't like camping anymore. It always starts simple, and that's what makes it worse. Back in 2018, I was living in a small rental house with my cousin Mark. We weren't especially close growing up, but we'd ended up in the same place after college and figured it would save money. He worked long hours at a warehouse, and I did freelance design from home. Most days, we barely saw each other. Nights were quiet, too quiet sometimes. We didn't go out much. Every now and then we'd grab burgers or sit around watching bad shows, but mostly we stayed in for a while. I started feeling restless, like the walls were slowly closing in. I needed something different, something outside. So I started scrolling through local forums and community boards, just looking for ideas. One suggestion kept popping up again and again. Camping. People talked about fresh air, quiet nights, clearing your head. We lived near a long stretch of old mountain land, full of trails that barely showed up on maps. I brought it up to Mark once while he was eating cereal straight out of the box. He didn't even look up, just said, "Nah, bugs and bears. I'm good." A few days later, I went anyway. I didn't tell him much, just that I was heading out overnight. I bought a cheap one-person tent, a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a few other things I thought sounded smart at the time. I had no real experience, no plan beyond spending one night and coming back in the morning. The place I chose was called Hollow Creek Trail, or at least that's what one old website listed it as. No pictures, no reviews, just a name and a rough distance marker. The drive took about an hour. The farther I went, the worse the road got. cracked pavement turned into gravel, then dirt. When I finally reached the trail entrance, there was nothing there. No sign, no parking lot. Just a narrow gap in the trees, where the ground looked slightly more worn down than everything else. No other cars, no voices, no movement. I sat in my car longer than I meant to, engine still running, listening. When nothing happened, I grabbed my backpack and stepped out. The trail was barely a trail, more like a suggestion. Branches hung low, brushing my shoulders. The air smelled damp and old, like wet leaves that never dried. Every few minutes I lost track of where I was supposed to walk and had to look for footprints or broken grass to guide me. It felt like no one had been there in a long time. After about an hour, the trees opened into a small clearing. That was the campsite. No sign, no fire ring. Just a flat patch of ground, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. That's when I noticed the logs. They were stacked neatly near the edge of the clearing. Too neatly. The ends were blackened, and small flakes of burned wood lifted and drifted away in the breeze. I knelt down and touched one. Still warm. Someone had been there recently. I stood up and slowly turned in a full circle. No tents, no bags, no footprints that looked fresh. Just trees and shadows. I remember thinking I should leave. The thought came and went, so fast it barely registered. Instead, I told myself I was being dramatic. It was a public trail. People came and went. That was normal. I set up my tent on the opposite side of the clearing, close to where the trail ended. It took longer than it should have. My hands kept slipping, and I dropped things more than once. I kept stopping to listen, even though I didn't know what I was listening for. There was still daylight, but it felt like it was draining faster than it should. I ate a sandwich, drank some water, and sat inside the tent as the light faded. The woods changed when it got darker. Shapes blurred together, sounds carried farther. Every rustle felt closer than it probably was. Then I heard it, a soft crackle. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then it happened again. Wood shifting, fire catching. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. On the far side of the clearing, right by the stack of logs, a fire was burning, and beside it sat a man. He was facing the fire, but his head turned as soon as I moved, like he already knew where I was. He looked older than me, maybe mid-40s. His clothes were dark and plain. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of it flickering in the firelight. I raised my hand, unsure what else to do. After a few seconds, he lifted his hand to his movements were slow, careful. I didn't say anything, neither did he. I gathered some sticks and made my own fire, mostly because it felt wrong not to. The flames gave me something to focus on, something solid. Night settled in fully. The woods around us disappeared into a wall of black. Every time I glanced over, the man was still there, sitting the same way, not eating, not adjusting the fire, not moving. I couldn't see a tent behind him, or a bag, or anything he might have brought with him. At one point, I realized something else. I never heard him walk in. The trail was right behind my tent. If he'd come that way, I would have noticed. The only other direction was deep forest, thick, unwelcoming. I stayed by the fire until my eyes burned from staring. Then I crawled into the tent and zipped it shut. I lay there, wide awake, listening. The crackle of his fire continued for a long time, longer than it should have, considering he never added wood. Eventually, it stopped. No pop, no fade, just gone. I waited, counting my breaths. My heart felt too loud. Then came footsteps, slow, deliberate, leaves crunching one by one. They circled the tent once. I could track them by sound alone. A shadow fell across the fabric. It stopped right in front of my face. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the thin wall between us, watching the shadow stretch and shift. I could see the outline of his head, his shoulders. He stood there for a long time. Then the shadow leaned closer, close enough that the fabric pulled inward slightly, like something was pressing against it. I don't know how long passed before it pulled away. The footsteps retreated, slow again, unhurried. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The clearing was empty. The man was gone. His fire was gone. The logs were cold and untouched, stacked neatly like before, like no one had ever used them. I packed up without thinking. I didn't care what broke. I didn't care how loud I was. I just wanted to get back to the trail. As I started walking, I realized something that still bothers me. The trail looked different, wider, more worn, like it had been used a lot. I followed it anyway, all the way back to my car. Nothing followed me, nothing stopped me. When I got home, Mark was on the couch. He looked at me and said, You get back early." I didn't answer. I just went to my room and shut the door. Later that night, I checked the website where I'd found Hollow Creek Trail. It was gone. No mention of it anywhere. No maps. No archives. Just dead links. Sometimes, when I think about that night, I wonder if the man ever left at all, or if he was just waiting for someone else to show up. I'll tell you this, the way I usually tell it to friends when we're sitting around late at night, when the room is quiet and nobody's checking the time anymore. It sounds better that way, more honest. This happened back in 2018, when I was 22 and broke in a very real, very embarrassing way. I'd just split up with my girlfriend, Mara, and we were still on decent terms, but living together wasn't an option anymore. She moved in with her cousin, and I found myself hunting for the cheapest place I could afford on short notice. That's how I ended up renting a tiny, rundown house on the edge of a place called Granton Hollow. It wasn't far from where I grew up, maybe 10 minutes by car, but it felt like a different world. People avoided that side of town unless they had a reason. Break-ins, fires, stuff getting stolen and never recovered. Everyone had a story about something bad that happened there, even if they couldn't prove it. I didn't have the luxury of being picky. The house itself was small and narrow, like it had been built as an afterthought. One bedroom upstairs, a cramped kitchen, and a living room that smelled faintly like dust and old wood, no matter how much I cleaned. My younger brother Evan helped me move in. He joked the whole time, trying to keep things light. But even he kept glancing at the neighboring houses like he expected someone to be watching us. The first day went by quietly, too quietly. No neighbors stopped to say hi. No one even drove past while we were unloading. By sunset, Evan headed out, and I was alone with my boxes, my half-assembled furniture, and that heavy silence you only notice once you're the only person in a place. The next morning, I started unpacking for real. Bedroom stuff first, then the kitchen, then my little work setup by the front window. That's when I noticed him. I was carrying a desk chair across the room when something outside caught my eye. A man stood at the end of my driveway. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, hands in his jacket pockets. He looked about my age, maybe mid-20s, with messy dark hair and a face that didn't really stick in my memory, which somehow made it worse. He stared at the house like he was counting something. Windows, maybe, or rooms. I froze and watched him longer than I should have. After a moment, he stepped off the driveway and slowly walked into the yard, not sneaking, not rushing, just calm. He leaned slightly, trying to look through my windows without getting too close. That's when my chest started to feel tight. I set the chair down and backed away from the window. My first thought was to call Evan, but instead I did something stupid and went downstairs. I told myself I was just going to scare him off, ask what he wanted, make it clear someone lived here now. When I opened the front door, the yard was empty. No footsteps, no car pulling away, no guy standing awkwardly nearby pretending he wasn't just peeking inside my house. I stepped onto the porch and looked both ways down the street. Nothing. It was like he'd never been there at all. I stood there for a long minute before going back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to laugh it off. Granton Hollow was full of weird people, right? Maybe he was lost. Maybe he thought the place was empty. I finished unpacking my office and left to grab food, needing to be around other humans for a bit. That night, I worked until I couldn't keep my eyes open. Boxes still lined the walls. Furniture sat half-assembled. I shut off the lights and collapsed into bed, telling myself I'd deal with the mess tomorrow. I woke up to the sound of something scraping. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My eyes were heavy, my head fuzzy. I rolled over and checked my phone. 3:07 a.m. Then I heard it again. A slow, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It came from downstairs. I sat up and listened. The sound stopped. My heart hammered in my ears. I waited, barely breathing, until the scraping started again. Longer this time. Closer. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but I could see the top of the stairs. As soon as the door creaked open, the noise stopped completely. That silence was worse. I took a few careful steps forward, my bare feet cold against the floor. I leaned over the railing and looked down into the living room. Nothing moved, no shadows, no shapes, just the dark outline of furniture where I remembered leaving it. I flipped on the light. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then my brain caught up. The couch had been shoved away from the wall. Boxes I had stacked neatly were scattered across the floor, and behind them, the wall itself was damaged, not smashed, not broken, carved. Chunks of drywall were missing, scooped out in uneven patches like someone had been digging with their hands. Some spots were deeper than others. One hole was big enough for me to fit my arm inside. I backed away slowly, my stomach twisting. Someone had been in my house, not stealing, not trashing the place, digging, searching. I ran back upstairs, locked myself in my bedroom, and called the police. While I waited, I heard faint sounds below me, soft shuffling, a breathy noise that might have been air moving through the house, or something else. The officers never found a point of entry. No broken windows, no forced doors. They asked if I had old wiring or plumbing in the walls, asked if I'd had work done before moving in. Their questions didn't make sense, and neither did the damage. They left just before sunrise. I didn't sleep after that. A few days later, Evan came by to help me patch the wall. He joked about secret rooms and buried treasure, but his voice kept trailing off when he thought I wasn't listening. At one point, he froze and asked if I'd always had that narrow space behind the wall. I told him I didn't think so. We never finished fixing it. I moved out less than a month later. Here's the part I don't usually tell people right away. A week after I left, Mara texted me out of nowhere. She asked if I'd been digging around in the walls of that old house. Said she'd had a dream about it. In the dream, someone was calling my name from inside the walls, using my voice but getting it slightly wrong. I asked her why she thought that. She didn't answer. I still drive past Granton Hollow sometimes. The house is empty now, boards over the windows. But every once in a while, I swear I see fresh marks on the siding, like something on the inside is still trying to get out.